Welcome back, everybody. This is grade 7 history. And today we're talking about the Korean War and how you can tell history through maps. This week, you need a pencil and a piece of paper for this lesson. And I want you to ask yourself, how are you feeling mentally? Do you need some water? Do you need to take a little break? And ask yourself, are you in a space to be productive? And if you're not, try to move somewhere where you feel like you can be productive. So for the warm up this week, I'm going to read the question. I'm going to count down from 3. And then once I get to 1, I want you to pause it. And I want you to write down your answer to this question, which is going to help us review some material that you learned at the beginning of the year about maps. So the question is, what is the difference between latitude and longitude? So go ahead and pause it in 3, 2, and 1. Okay, welcome back. So hopefully you remembered that latitude and longitude lines are lines on a map that help us pinpoint a specific location. They are numbered lines that refer to specific places. Longitude lines are long. They run from south to north. Latitude lines are flat, flat. They run from west to east and east to west. Specifically today, we're going to be talking about one very famous latitudinal line that has to do with the Korean War. So by the end of this lesson, you will be able to describe the events and outcome of the Korean War by analyzing and decoding a series of maps. I want you to get used to this country down below. We're going to see a lot of different maps that have this country. This is Korea. Specifically, it's called the Korean Peninsula. A peninsula is a outcropping of land that goes into water that is surrounded by water on 3 sides. Notice there's a North Korea and there's a South Korea, and there's a little red line between them that we're going to talk about in a little bit. So we're going to go through the words of the week first, and then you're going to get some background information on the Korean War. We're going to go through a map analysis together, and then I'm going to talk briefly about the weekly mission, which is on the schedule for Thursday. So the words of the week are armistice, 38th parallel, and United Nations. So go ahead and pause it if you need to write down these with about 2 to 3 spaces in between. So write down the definitions as we get to them. First is armistice, which is an agreement made by opposing sides in a war to stop fighting for a certain time, a truce. Notice an armistice is not an end to a war, it is a temporary pause in a war. 38th parallel is the popular name given to the latitude line 38 degrees north that in East Asia roughly separates North and South Korea. So that's the line that we saw on that map a couple slides ago. This is what it actually looks like in person. The soldiers close to us are South Korean soldiers. The building across that little divided area is North Korea. There are constantly soldiers watching this space to make sure that no one crosses it. And it's called the demilitarized zone. And finally, the United Nations, which is an international organization with headquarters in New York City, formed to promote international peace, security, and cooperation under the terms of the charter signed by 51 founding countries in San Francisco in 1945. And this is the UN flag down below. Notice that this took place at the end of World War II, and these countries' purpose was to make sure that there was a forum or a place where countries could get together and talk so that there was not another repeat of World War II. And the UN is very, very influential today as well. Okay, so background on the Korean War. After World War II ended, much of the world was divided up between communist countries controlled and supported by the Soviet Union and free democratic countries supported by Western Europe and the United States. Those communist countries, this is for a sample map of Western Europe, the communist countries are in red, while the free democratic countries are in blue. A lot of the world kind of mimicked this pattern of communist countries versus democratic countries. And the United States did not want communism to spread to other countries that were not yet communist. This boiled over to a conflict in Korea. So Korea after World War II was divided in the North and the South. The North was communist and was supported by the Soviet Union. The South was democratic and supported by the UN and the United States. Before the end of the war, Japan had controlled Korea since 1910. So after the war ended, Korea was kind of given back. The Korean people took control back of their country, though it was split still. So to kind of orient ourselves in the world, here's a world map. The Korean Peninsula is right here. If you look where Japan is and where the Asia continent, the words for Asia Korea is right here. So that's where we're talking about in the world. I think it's really important that you know exactly where you are when we're talking about it, because most of the maps are going to be zoomed in just on the Korean Peninsula. This is what it looks like from satellite view. This right here is China. This is what was at the time the Soviet Union, and this is Japan. It's very important to notice how close these two countries are to North Korea, because that plays a lot into what happened in the Korean War. So in order to reunite the country under communist rule, the North invaded the South in 1950. The leader of the North at that time was Kim Il-sung, grandfather of someone you probably have heard about recently, Kim Jong-un. So Kim Il-sung was the leader at the time of the Korean War, and this is a portrait of him. Now, I'm not going to get into the specifics of the battles and what actually happened in the Korean War, because you're going to figure that out based just on the maps that you're going to work through in the weekly mission. You're going to use those maps to be able to tell what happened specifically in the Korean War. Broadly, though, in response to the invasion of the South by the North, the United States and the UN sent troops in support of the South. There was a lot of stuff that happened that you're going to figure out with those maps, and then eventually a truce was called, and the war paused with an armistice. This is a picture of them, the North and the South, signing that armistice. North and South Korea were divided at the 38th parallel, that line that we've seen. So here's a zoom up of it. This is the 38th parallel, also known as, there's the 38th parallel. This is known as the DMZ, the demilitarized zone, and this is the line that separates South and North Korea. Here are some statistics that show the impact of the Korean War. I want you to look at the key, I want you to look at the bar graph, and I want you to look at the numbers. Now, notice how it says North Korea, then a 1. That tells you the footnote down below to refer to that. It gives you a little bit more information. So what I want you to do is I'm going to count down from 3 to 1, and I want you to pause it. Once I get to the end, once I get to the 1, I want you to start thinking about some things that you notice about this graph. So I want you to write down 3 things that kind of pop out to you about this. And we'll go over some of those in a second. So 3, 2, 1, you go ahead and pause it. Okay, so you might have noticed that the civilian dead and missing was very, very high for South Korea and for North Korea. Civilians are people who were not soldiers, but were still killed or were missing and presumed dead from the war. So the civilian impact of this war was very high. South Korea and North Korea, military killed and military wounded, is much higher than the other countries, except for China. So China is going to get involved in this war somehow too, but you're going to figure that out later. And the military dead and wounded for the United States was not as high as those 2 countries, but it was still very impactful. If you notice these, so if you look at this 2 for South Korea also, South Korean estimates of civilian dead and missing range from 500,000 to 1 million. So they're not even sure how many civilians died because this war was so disruptive. So you could have had some other things you've written down for this. This is a really good summation of some of the human toll of the war. So today, North Korea is known as the Hermit Kingdom because they are very, very isolated. This is a picture of Kim Jong-un, who is the current leader of North Korea. He's been in the news a lot recently because everybody thought he was dead. And the reason the reason everybody thought he was dead because he had not made a public appearance in a long time. North Korea is one of the most authoritarian, secretive, and kind of just backwards countries in the world. The people are brainwashed through propaganda to thinking that Kim Jong-un and the North Korean government are in complete control of everything and that everybody else in the world is terrible and they're the best, even though North Korea can't feed its own people. Lots of people die of starvation. There's tons of famine. Most of the country lives in abject poverty. So North Korea is a mess, in other words, but its people are brainwashed to think that the rest of the world is a mess and that they're the best. This map that we're going to analyze together kind of shows really how backwards North Korea is. So what I want you to do is I want you to pause it once I count down to 1, and I want you to take a few minutes, and I just want you to write down and tell me what you think is going on in this map. So in about 1 or 2 sentences, and then we'll talk about it when we come back. So go ahead and pause it in 3, 2, 1. Okay. So hopefully you realize that this map shows the Korean Peninsula, it shows North Korea, and it shows South Korea. Hopefully you also realize that this is probably taken from space, and that it shows light at night. So if you notice that South Korea is all lit up, Seoul, which is the capital, is very, very bright. There's lots going on. And then if you look at North Korea, there's only one little blip of light right around Pyongyang, which is their capital. The rest of the country is almost completely dark when you look at the rest of it compared to Japan, South Korea, and China. This shows that North Korea is very agricultural, and they don't have a lot of the same modern technologies that the rest of the world do because they're so backwards and so controlling of their own people. And that is evidenced by the light that you can see all over the world, except for all over Asia, excuse me, and except for North Korea. So on Thursday, you're going to analyze a series of 4 maps in order to understand the sequence and military events of the Korean War. So you're going to look through 4 maps, and each of those maps is going to show a different time period in the Korean War. After you analyze those 4 maps, you're going to be able to write a paragraph saying what exactly happened during the course of the Korean War. All right, everybody, I hope you have a great rest of your week.